This is a different kind of panel. So full disclosure, you guys are gathered here because we're talking about the thing that I am thinking a whole lot about in what technically reports on. So if nothing else, this is the thing that I want to write about. So forget the actual conference format. It's this question that we are seeing an acceleration of a bifurcated economic recovery. We are both reporting on some of the most successful economic engines our communities have ever had, alongside perhaps a recession-induced deepening of income inequality and the like. So the central concept of this conversation is like, what's the moral imperative? What does it actually look like? Is it realistic? How do we change and transform? And you all have really different kind of backgrounds and experiences intentionally. So I guess to start us off, I'm kind of curious with a softball is like, why does it matter? Like, couldn't we say we're going to have web-based software firms that will accelerate and thrive? Why the heck do we even care about how our communities look in distribution of inequality? Like, why does it even matter? If we have tech CEOs and others who are unsure, why the heck does this even matter? Why is this a problem? It should be easy.
Christopher, do you want us to introduce ourselves one more time since we have
I guess
a
fair
formal
enough.
Intro?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a formal. I mean, we could do the why do you care about this work and who are you, Elizabeth?
Perfect. I'm happy to start. My name is Elizabeth Lindsay. I am the CEO of a nonprofit called Bite Back, which is spelled BYTE, back. And our mission is to provide a pathway of inclusive tech training that leads to living wage careers. And what that means is that we train adults in DC and Baltimore, and adults who have never had the opportunity to learn how to use technology in ways that I think all of us who are on this panel take for granted and who are in this at this conference. And so we help them get foundational tech skills, and then we help them move up into industry recognized certifications and into jobs in IT and administrative services and really any career that requires the use of a computer and familiarity with technology. And I think your question is a great one. I think that the consequences of having a bifurcated economy are dire. And we are seeing that play out over the past 6 months in a way that I think none of us could have imagined. So all of us here, it looks like we're all working from our homes. We're safe. We're able to continue to make an income. And that's because we have a skill set and skill sets that enable us to do that. We have in-demand skills. We have jobs that are tech-based. We're all using computers. We know how to use them. And the individuals who don't have those skills, the individuals who didn't go to college, who haven't used a computer before, and there are millions of Americans who are in that boat, they're the people who are either unemployed or they're the people who are out working at grocery stores, working in retail, delivering food, driving Uber, all these jobs that, we now call frontline workers, and that are the jobs that are often the lowest paying jobs in our economy, and people are putting their lives at risk. And so this crisis is just really shining a light on the way that our economy has operated forever. And the people who are really left behind also are predominantly people of color and people without college degrees. And so that's why we should care. I mean, I think we should care because we should care about people's ability to be safe and their abilities to be able to support themselves and their families.
And I'm going to say at the outset, please don't make me call on all of you guys. Let's have an actual conversation. Bilal, you have a thriving software firm. You could just, I presume, just go building about software, but you care a whole lot about the community you're in. Why?
We do. So it's a big deal. Again, so I'm Delali. I'm the CEO of Fearless. Just as a quick introduction to those folks that just jumped on. Digital services firm out of Baltimore. Our mission really is to build software with the soul and envision a world where good software powers all the things that matter. And so if you are across country and you're trying to start a business, we power SBA.gov. And so we help entrepreneurs across country. We also power the federal government search engine, search.gov, as well as their identity provider, login.gov, and a number of other things across healthcare and education, et cetera. But, I think this really matters because, as Elizabeth spoke earlier, like there's communities that are left out, right? Our focus is always on like the user and the human that's on the back end, right? So yes, we may support the government, but they are like helping people, right? This is about like someone that's trying to get their healthcare and is struggling to like access like a site to like figure out how to get benefits, right? Those are the people that we work for, and those are people that are always kind of front of mind for us. And so you think about this economy today, that was just mentioned, that we can just pop on a computer and like work, right? And people are working globally. And I saw an announcement about one of the islands was saying, come work in the islands for like a year and like set up shop and work remote here, right? And that's such a huge cry for where so many people are, that if you don't even there's so many people that don't even have access to like reliable internet, right, or a device. We're sitting here on a virtual conference from the comfort of our homes, and people can't even like do their schoolwork, right? Which is kind of ridiculous, like in 2020. And so we talk about kind of this gap between high paying quality jobs and people that just are struggling to even like meet basic needs. We should care a heck of a lot. And I think technology in general, we've got a very special role to play like in this space. I kind of call us accelerators, right? And so for us, right, if I wanted to send a piece of mail, right, a century ago, right, get on a horse and buggy, right, and write a thing, and like it would get there, right? And so we can still do that today, but like I can send a text, right, or I can send an email, or I can get on social media and like DM someone, and it just happens faster. And so I think we're often like left out of this acceleration. So when we think about concept of equity and justice, like we have a really unique role to play to say the good stuff that's going on, like let's accelerate this work and help to push it forward.
That's a great point. And if you don't mind, I'm going to jump in on that. I love the commentary here, and it really kind of triggered something for me, because we find ourselves kind of back in 2009, right? And so one of the things that I will share with you, if you didn't know, is in our region, our footprint, from 2009 to 2019, if you buy that was a period of sustained economic recovery, which I can tell you it was, the Philadelphia market had the least equitable economic recovery of any market in the country. Meaning, if you're in the top 4 quintiles of earning, top 80%, you did actually better by the numbers than any other market in the country. Food didn't get as expensive. Rent, you see this exodus of New Yorkers come into Philly because it's I know it's expensive for many, but it's actually rent and home purchasing and acquisition is cheaper. And yet, if you were in the bottom quintile, and this isn't my opinion, this was a study we commissioned by Moody's, the bottom 20%, bottom quintile, was the only market in the United States during 2009 to 2019 that actually went backward in income, minus 4%. So back to Barbados. And I'm not picking on any place in particular, but like Radnor is Barbados. Like I'm trying to think of a posh South Jersey place. I got my guy.
Yeah. The context there is wealthy suburb is the context for our other geographies.
The point of this is like, now that we find ourselves back in this economic moment, what we need to do, particularly from the tech community, is greater ability for this challenge that affects all our residents to hit home in a way that is less, it's almost inescapable. And so like, I have a couple of things. If anybody's on this thing who doesn't know me, like, be careful if you introduce yourself to me. Chris knows this. I'm a relentless favor asker, but like something I think that would be really interesting is these problems are so vast. And yet I have this dream and vision where every citizen who lives here has the equivalent of a credit score that you can quantify and measure how you are personally invested in your neighbor's well-being, right? You can't buy a house if you don't have 770 credit score. You don't get to be like considered a real person if you don't have a civic score that's above this. And I'll tell you, like, these things are measurable, and getting more proximate to people's pain is really part of the issue here, because when you're talking about those kind of ideas, like, the challenges are very knowable. The solutions are complex, But the biggest issue is what I call the Philly Shrug. And you just got to, this is a measurement against it. Not only do we have these deep challenges, the Civic Health Index measures the civic health of every market. And the Philadelphia market is 48th in median and mean philanthropic giving out of 50, 46th in voter participation, and 43rd in volunteerism. So like big challenges, we know those, right? 44% of Philadelphians are African American, 2% of owned enterprise in Philadelphia is African American owned, right? So that's not a statistic that you wouldn't believe me if I told you that. But also, you've got kind of a lethargic, and I think sometimes people feel incapacitated by the level of and the scale of the challenges. And what we need are not artisanal and boutique efforts around this. We need like things at scale that you can measure, and people who have talent and ability can see a clear pathway as to how they can participate.
So I want to come back to that, but actually, Governor, Delaware is a really interesting case study, because one of the fears that I think about, something that I'm hoping that we'll write more about, is the white flight to remote work risk that we have of when we report on the tech companies that go, why isn't everyone just remote? What's the problem? It's like this complete disconnect of just understanding like reliable internet access. Like there's 1,000 reasons why offices do have some equitability to them. And Delaware is an interesting case study because for a whole bunch of reasons, for a whole bunch of decades, you guys have had a real powerhouse of a corporate sector in your state that has allowed for some economic gains. Do you, from your vantage point, fear if a whole lot of companies suddenly say we actually don't need to domicile our employees in one central place, and those companies' relationship with place might change? Are we going to lose some of that corporate engine that we might have in a place like Delaware? Or is that something you've thought about? Talk a little bit about your own relationship between growth economy and what it's tethered to.
Well, I think it's a risk. I mean, when I think about the growth economy, I think that the growth economy is necessary but insufficient. What also has to be present is that the bounties of that growth have to be shared more broadly. And, sort of going back to your initial question about why this matters, and I tend not to go too hyperbole, but in this case, I actually think that the underlying democracy is at risk. When you think about the kinds of inequities that Bill was talking about in Philadelphia, I mean, they really exist across the country. And it's not a surprise to me that the country is as divided as it is right now, unfortunately, because so many people feel left out. And if you think about what the American dream used to mean for many, not for all, and particularly not for too many people of color, but the idea was that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you would get ahead. And we just don't have the same kind of economic mobility in this country that we aspire to. And frankly, even compared to other countries, which used to have much less economic mobility than we have, they now have more. And so the question, one of the questions is, what does it mean for the kinds of people who might be tuned into this to this webinar? And I do think there is a particular responsibility on the part of technology companies in the following way. When I was governor, I attended almost every day from 2011 to 2016, less in 2009, 2010, because Bill said that was from starting in 2009, it was a period of growth. We didn't really feel much growth in 2009, and frankly, in 2010, we were still bottoming out. But from 2011 on, I tended to have every single day 2 sets of conversations. One was with employers who would say, we can't find enough skilled workers. And then the other set of conversations were with aspiring workers who just wanted to be given a chance. They might be with people who were coming out of prison. They might be with people who had disabilities. They might be with people who just didn't have as great an education as they should have had. And so a big part of my effort was to bring those 2 groups together, because what often happened when I talked to technology employers, many of them in the financial services industry, I would ask them what their recruitment strategy was. And too often their recruitment strategy was, we hire away from each other. And that's a lousy recruitment strategy. And so we really put a lot of emphasis into developing additional pipelines of talent through a number of different initiatives. And I think technology and our employers have to be willing to give new folks a chance, because otherwise, if all you do is continue to hire away from each other, maybe you're going to get by, but it's certainly not good for the community at large. And there's no chance that we're going to have a strong economy if that economy doesn't include everybody. And so we have really significant work to do in that direction.
Elizabeth, I'm almost thinking you guys are both obviously on the software firm side and the education side. You got to have thoughts there. Maybe to almost frame it in a way, I'm interested in the reliance we have on the private sector, which maybe just we have to accept there's a gap in education. It's not happening. The number of times we've reported on the 12-person software firm that is meant to build an apprenticeship program and go from cradle to grave lifetime learning. I'm not sure if I have a lot of confidence in that 12-person software firm being able to really solve this problem. Is that where we are, though? Elizabeth, you have to think a lot about this, how we actually are connecting tech economy.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point. I think this is a problem that requires work and attention from the public sector, nonprofit sector, and from the private sector. I think we all need to work together. So, for example, there are so many nonprofits that are providing great training in more foundational skills. The 12-person software firm is not going to want to create an apprenticeship program for someone who has never turned on a laptop before. There's not a place for that type of training in the tech sector specifically. And so I really think that we need to support, and this often comes from government, but governments really need to support high quality training programs that are reaching people at scale. I think that's another issue that we look to the tech sector. So I'm in DC, so we have a lot of amazing tech startups that are really becoming more of an engine of the economy. They often have extremely small staff, and they often are only looking for, they don't have the capacity to train. So they're looking for people who are already experienced. A lot easier to find somebody from another company. Like the governor said, you find somebody who's a senior engineer over there and you pay them a little bit more money and bring them. And so it leaves out the vast majority of people who really need support. So this is a problem that we know how to solve it. It's not that hard to provide high quality training, but we don't have the resources dedicated to it. And we do need to have better relationships between employers and the training providers who are building the talent.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of things we've talked about, right? You talked about the relationship between companies and the city or the state, right? From one perspective and training. I mean, when I think about it, so we're actually unique at Fearless to a number of our competitors in the space where a lot of them were already remote first. They hire people from all across the country that are sitting at home working. We were different. We were very intentional about everyone sitting in one spot. And we're finding through the pandemic how much people attached part of our culture to that physical space and being together and collaborating together. And so we're seeing kind of how that plays out. But for us, it also is a very tangible marker for our connection to the community, right? And for us, what we find the differentiator between us and our competitors are, if you got 50 people, 50 different states, right? When you talk about community and impacting where you are, that's very hard for them to get their arms around, what that means and how they really lean in a very measurable way versus our very, very, very direct and focus around one particular place. And so when we look at even this generation of people that are trying to grow, trying to get engaged and trying to get involved, you'd ask the question, I think earlier, about technology companies and why should they care, and shouldn't we just kind of walk away? And I think there are a couple tangible reasons why they ought to care, and I'll talk about some of the gaps. Number one, I mean, there's plenty of data out there that says, you perform better when you've got, diversity of thoughts and perspectives and all these other things, right? And so there's data out there to suggest that. The issue becomes okay, many of them know that the data is there, how come they still won't do it, right? And is it a won't do or can't do or don't know how to do, and everyone's somewhere different in that spectrum. And so much of that becomes how do you change your circle, right? If I'm doing a startup, I'm going to my circle, the people that I know, the people that they know, right? And if that circle has, we all went to the same school, We're all from the same communities. We all have the same background. We have the same interests, right? It's going to be hard for me to bring in a diverse set of thought and perspective. And so much of what I think needs to happen is how do we begin to bridge that gap, right? And get people in the room together that haven't traditionally been in the room together. How do you get people to build new relationships so that they can extend opportunities? There's so many smart and amazing. You think about even the tech and the startup scene, amazing, entrepreneurs that are out there today that they don't have the structure, they don't have the funding, they don't know where to start, they don't know, access to incubators. And so just sometimes being a good translator, like in this space, from, a boardroom to some of the community, or whatever it may be, is a lot about how you can get some of this conversation moving and started.
It starts with understanding what the customer wants, because without that, then we're just sort of, it's all talk. So let me give you a couple specific examples from Delaware. We have a great entrepreneur, a guy named Ernie DeAnastasis, who for 30 years ran a great IT firm. And a few years ago, he decided he was going to reinvent himself, the remaining years of his career. And he was going to build an IT firm focused on employing people with disabilities, and particularly people with autism. And he is now in a number of markets around the country. And, they have to compete with everybody else, and they're doing so very, very effectively. And the difference that this makes in the lives of the people with autism and their families is extraordinary, because these are people who have a lot to bring to the table, who have never been given a shot before. But now that they've been given a shot, they're contributing. They have a reason to get up every day. They're not on the public dole. They're taxpayers. It's just an amazing thing to see. So that's one set of examples. That's one example. The other is a terrific program. We have Zip Code Wilmington in Delaware. And again, this idea that the employers were hiring away from each other. I was approached when I was governor by a number of Delaware business people, led by a guy named Ben DuPont, who said, you need a coding school in Delaware. I didn't even know what a coding school was at the time. And at the end of the day, these guys, Ben and a few of his friends, partnered with the state, created Zip Code Wilmington, which now has several classes a year, generally of 30 to 40 people. And the average salary for these folks before they start the program is around $25,000. 12 weeks later, their average salary is closer to $70,000. It is extraordinary. Now, it'd be great if you could do that at an incredible scale. But what these folks now have the opportunity to do is to upskill themselves through an intensive 12-week program. And we're fortunate that we have a lot of great employers in the state and in the region who need those kinds of skills. And so, but again, it all starts, we can't ask our employers to do a whole lot just on charity. They're going only to invest if this makes sense for their business. And I think that's a really important part of the mindset.
Can we talk for a minute? Something that I also grapple with is this distinction between what is pure incrementalism and what is true economic changeover. Most cities we report on, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of jobs that over the last few decades have been eradicated through lots of just macroeconomic trends. And a lot of the programs we report on, really noble efforts. They are, 10, 20, 100, 150 people, which again, truly remarkable in this individual scale. A lot of you all work on the mix of both ground level and the biggest scale. Do you think over the last, decade or so of all of you collectively doing this work, is that scale growing, or are we still like doing small, minor changes? Yeah. I mean, you all actually, I want to hear all of you. You all are got to be wrestling this at some point.
So I have an opinion. This is like where I get disinvited to the panel, because like this is like you're triggering me in like the biggest way ever. It's when you're talking about, well, you're looking at, I could talk about Camden and I could talk about Chester with some knowledge, but Philly's the thing I know most about. And when you're talking about the viability of the American dream for fully 25% of the folks who live who are our residents and our neighbors, that's a scale issue. And to Jack's point, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And what you've got the bifurcation of corporate social responsibility that is really primarily about branding and saying, this is what, because of you, this one kid did something spectacular. And like, if you were to run your corporation, we changed one life at a time, you'd go out of business. Like, right. You would never approach it. You're trying to scale, you're trying to measure, you're trying to do, and I'm going to, every good meeting has some information, inspiration, and some gossip, right? So here's the gossip. We went in Philadelphia Public School District on one day from saying kids are going to go back to school 50% of the time in person, right? Okay, we're doing that. And then I won't get into how this happened, but I was in the room where this happened. We then went to, nope, 100% virtual. I'm like, okay, let's now talk about the digital divide that Elizabeth talked about earlier. How many kids, you can throw this in the chat, how many kids and families are not currently connected to reliable, stable internet for learning? You can make your guesses as you go. Here's the answer. Nobody knew. The answer is the city didn't know, the school district doesn't know. This is a knowable thing. Like, if you're trying to get kids to not go backward in their learning, you need to know the problem you're trying to solve, and it's not a one person at a time solution. So what I've always called for, and this is what we're working very hard on, is a holistic, systemic, public-private partnership built on the 4 pillars of our town. The private sector thinks that it's the government's problem in our town, which is, nobody has ever thought that in the history of ever, that the government's going to fix it. Sorry, Jack. The private sector only wants to do it on their terms, like as sort of after hours and at will, rather than thinking this is about the civic health and the viability of our city. Private sector, city government, private philanthropy, which, they talk the biggest game, but they spend only 5% of their corpus, and it's frankly other people's money. They're dead. The United Way is the only entity that spends the money from people who are alive. And the third part is community organizations that are when we talk about funding community organizations, the way we do grant making is the Hunger Games. We pit them against each other. Like, everybody high fives each other in the room, but then when they leave, they're like, I need to get close to Bill so I can get that money. So here, like, what you need is an approach to a civic challenge that has a target and a timeline that is ambitious. The dollars go, unfortunately, to entities that can deliver against that, and there's greater investment. And the idea that you would have, as a corporate way of engaging your community, a day of service. So what are you doing the other 364 days of the year? That's not enough. Like, and somebody needs to get serious about, we have dug ourselves a deep hole, and we need more people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and be personally invested in their neighbor's success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to the question that you asked,
virtual clap.
Before that, about sort of the scaling. I think there's a real difference between 2 different challenges. One is what we do with our young people who are in school, and one is what we do with the people whose jobs have been lost. And these are very, very different challenges. And the second one is much more significant than the first. And because, you talked about the hundreds of thousands of jobs, across the country, millions of jobs. And so, for folks who used to work at the General Motors plant or the Chrysler plant in Delaware, and the oil refinery up on the Pennsylvania-Delaware line, these are really hard issues, because if you're 40 or 50 years old and you've been doing one thing your whole life, and all of a sudden that's been taken away, that's a real set of challenges. And not everybody can become a coder. Not everybody can become a phlebotomist. And so I think there's really significant work to do. With the younger people, frankly, it's a lot different. And in the chat, somebody mentioned what about Delaware's Pathways to Prosperity, and this is a great example of a program we started maybe 7 years ago. The idea was students in high school, by the time they finish high school, could graduate with a high school diploma, with college credits under their belt, and with a nationally recognized certificate that they can do a particular type of job. And we started with 27 students who were studying advanced manufacturing and who would graduate with a certificate in that arena so that employers know that these kids could do the job. So we started with 27 students. Today we have 20,000. And so we have scaled 27 to 20,000 in about 6 or 7 years. And now instead of just being around advanced manufacturing, we include 14 or so different fields, everything from computer programming to bioscience to culinary and allied health and many more. So I do think, focusing on the young people is really, really important, and that is our future. But we can't do that at the exclusion of thinking about all these folks who have been losing their jobs in the meantime.
I want to say I completely agree. And that program sounds incredible. And I wish we had that nationwide. In Washington, D.C., we have many, many high school students graduating who don't have that certification, who don't have basic tech skills. And I will tell you that they are 90% Black, 90% African American. And I want to say also, from my perspective, running a nonprofit that trains adults who have been shut out of the economy, it is very difficult to get people to pay attention to this group. And, I think we say foundations and people, they want to fund puppies and they want to fund babies, which are important things. I have a puppy, I have children, but there really is, I think there's really a lack of understanding of how many people, according to the Brookings Institution, since 2002, the U.S. economy has lost 28 million low-tech jobs. So in 2002, there were 28 million more jobs that were available to people who didn't have medium or high-tech skills. Those jobs have either disappeared or, you mentioned advanced manufacturing. Manufacturing used to be a job that was not, did not require high-tech skills. Now it does. And so there are millions and millions of people who were once employable and they're not anymore. And there really isn't a lot of willpower and focus on training those communities.
Yeah.
Please.
No, I was going to say, Bill, you had me jumping out my seat here while you were talking about companies and corporations, and we're big fans of that. I mean, obviously our business is civic tech, but this idea that the community and the give back is like an add-on to your company, like, oh, let me go do something and make a lot of money, and oh yeah, and by the way, let's check the box for corporate responsibility. The fact that it's an office, right, and not like in the DNA of the company is in my opinion like really problematic. How we view our lens of business through Fearless is there's three bins, right? There's a customer, right? There's your culture, this internal, and the community, and all of them must work in concert for you to be kind of a great company and be kind of living this way. And so much of it relies on personal responsibility of saying, again, I'm responsible for my neighbor, right? And so we look at it and say, oh, there's crime in our community and there's this and home values are down, all these other things. But we disconnect the fact that there are plenty of people that can work and are eligible and enable that could power your company that are there, and you're just not connecting a dot, right? And so part of your inability and inaction to activate, people that are there that want to get plugged in hurts you. It hurts your bottom line. You will build potentially like faulty tech. I mean, there's a lot around, AI and the bias that's built into tools, right? And so you're not getting the end results you're looking for anyway, right? You've got a community of folks that want to work, right? They want to work, they want access, and they're being slapped in the hand multiple times over from, we grew up in from redlining and the education is bad and we don't have access to technology. And so again, now we cannot get access to these jobs. And so there's a personal responsibility that has to go into how do we connect these dots and bring these communities and bring these people together. So I can't agree more. It cannot be an add-on. It must be a fundamental core of part of your business. And we see this play out in so many we have terms for it, right? Social entrepreneurship or social innovation. Like that should be every company, right? Why is it just a select few that are in this space? And so I couldn't agree more.
Last year we had the signing of the business roundtable letter, 150 of the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world making a pledge to expand the idea of shareholder value into a stakeholder value, which would include customers and community and the like. There's a year later, there begins to be that business reporting of how much of that was true and how much of that was glossed over. And it's a mixed bag. I think in the reporting, there are some companies that it seems something happened, but there's of course, lots of examples not. I wonder if we assume here that we are going through a massive economic shift, and so we assume that this has to be a fundamental change in how private sector, what the responsibility it has. How optimistic or pessimistic is this group? Are we along a journey that is happening, and our programs are scaling up? We are changing the types of jobs we are training people for, and maybe it's not going as fast as we want, but it's happening? Or are you more in the camp of, holy hell, we are not on, every road will get you to somewhere if you don't know where you want to go, to use Bill's metaphor, and we are lost? Which camp are you guys in?
I think I'm a little bit in both camps. I'm actually
you can't be.
Well, on that particular question, I'm probably a little more optimistic, because I think what's happening is that employees, particularly young employees, as well as customers, are making demands of businesses that the businesses are going to have to respond to that for no other reason. Employees want more progressive policies. They're more focused on, and every business is competing for talent. And there are a lot of really talented young people who are basically saying, we want to work for a business that recognizes we have responsibilities that go beyond stockholders. And I think that's a really important set of pressures. And a lot of customers are going to say the same thing. I would say, the responsibility, though, this is absolutely a shared responsibility. I mean, government's certainly not going to fix it on its own. Business is not going to fix it on its own, and neither are the academic institutions. And I think one of the things that's got to happen is we've got to have much better communication between employers, government, and the academic institutions. We have such a disconnect in this country. If you ask academic leaders, these numbers are not exact, but they're directionally right. If you ask academic leaders, are you doing a good job preparing your students for the workforce? 90% of them say we're doing a good job. If you ask employers whether academic institutions are doing a good job preparing their students for the workforce, 10% of them think they're doing a good job. And so that is a massive, massive disconnect, and that's got to be fixed. And the only way is for these employers and the academic institutions to speak to each other a lot more clearly than they have in the past.
One clarification on Jack, but then I do want to hear everyone's optimistic or pessimistic camp. I've heard a version of those numbers. Is your gut that if we had a apples to apples comparison from earlier in the 20th century, that would have been different? That's the implication, right? That you think mid 20th century somewhere we would have been more in sync.
I think so, and one of the reasons, and this is another data point, about 2 years ago, Gallup, with the support of Strata Education, I'm on the board of, interviewed about 300,000 Americans about their higher education experience. And for the most part, the results are pretty miserable. People really don't feel good about it because for the most part, their higher education hasn't led to something that they really wanted it to lead to. And so if you look at this from the perspective of the consumer, the person being educated, or the folks who are actually employing these people, it's not a happy story. And I think it probably has not gotten better. And ironically, it should, because we have better information than we've ever had before, labor market information,
right,
in terms of where the jobs are, what they pay, what skill sets you need to do those jobs, where you can get those skills, and how much it would cost. And we need to do a much better job of making sure that information is broadly shared.
So, optimistic, pessimistic. I'm interested in that. Finishing that out.
I'm also in both camps, right? I'm optimistic.
Come on.
I'm optimistic about the times, right? I feel like it was a perfect storm of COVID hitting, everyone being home, right, and people reflecting and just doing assessments. And I felt like we saw lots of empathy, and like the world was standing still for a moment, right before George Floyd, like all the Black Lives Matter pieces, right? So it added a light to that I think. I mean, this stuff's always been there, right? But something about this moment made everyone like take a breath and stop and think about like what the future ought to look like. Our issue is in America, we just have very short memories, right? And so, that was really popular. Everyone's slapping up the banners and tweeting about it and all that. So we're talking about, COVID again, the election, Supreme Court, all that stuff's like super important. And so I'm optimistic about the times. I'm pessimistic about, the staying power of some of these things, right? And the companies that, made these huge pledges and here's what we're going to do. I think for us, like how we view it is, people look at us and say, well, you guys have done a good job of building like a diverse company, right? And They initially think like, oh, well, you're Black, so therefore, right, that's why you're able to do it. And it's like, no, we planned for it. It's literally in our strategic plan. Everyone in our company is aware of it. We've got a goal we call our 50-50 goal, which is 50% women and 50% minorities in our companies before 25, right? And so we're actively like working for it. We plan for it. And we use that same thinking around any other business goal that, companies have business goals and they've got plans and they've got objectives and tactics and all of those things. And we measure it, right? And we reflect on it. We think about how to get there. But when it comes to like corporate responsibility, it's not something we plan for, and we're not executing. We're not tracking it the same way. So it's really easy to forget, right? When it's not like in your long-term plans and you're really like walking towards that. So I am pessimistic about people's staying power, but I'm hopeful that people plan for that just like they plan for other things.
A quick story, Delali. Mark Coleman, founder of a company called Tactile Group, whom we report on, Black founder, once teased me at a conference. He said, I really want to diversify my work staff, but I just can't find any white engineers. They just don't exist. I don't know what else to do. So it's, it's possible. Elizabeth, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, I was like, I don't want to follow Bill on this question because I'm sure Bill has some great things to say. You know what? Dean in the chat said, optimism is necessary. And I think I have to be optimistic because this is the work I've dedicated my life to this work. And I mean, I agree with everything that Delali and the governor said. I think that there are so many of us on the ground doing amazing things. The conversation has shifted. I think it's already, people are already forgetting Black Lives Matter and all of these things, but at least I think there has been an increase in people who are looking at systems of inequality and people who are really starting to get it. And I hope that continues. Yeah, that's all I have to say. So I'm gonna choose. I have to be in the optimistic camp.
We're wrapping. I have a couple minutes left. So Bill, I want to give you, tell me, are you in the optimistic? We're making progress in this relationship between economic change and the private sector's relationship, or pessimistic and we're off the rails?
So it is fully my job to be optimistic, right? But I can be optimistic and carry hope in my spirit the more I face the reality of what we're up against, right? Like I can't be, otherwise it's wishful thinking, right? Hope is born in facing reality. And so there are two things that are enduring that I know to be true about how we've conducted our work so far. One, since 1924, our mayor then was Richardson Dilworth. And he said then that Philadelphia will never claim its rightful place on the world stage until it contends with the fact that it is corrupt and content. Corruption is one issue that's not the topic of this panel, but contentment is, I don't know so my job is to help us find your way into the place where you uniquely can contribute to reversing the reality we're currently living in. The second has to do with, maybe this has always been a business principle, but the number one thing that people say, well, why don't people just collaborate more? Collaboration, why don't people collaborate? In Philly, there's an unspoken acronym for why people are unwilling to collaborate. And it's always, I've tried to teach the team about this. It's called the MET, money, ego, and turf. Is this going to cost me money? I don't like Chris Wink, so I'm not going to work with that guy. Or you're stepping on Elizabeth's turf, so don't. So those are the two macro challenges. And what I feel like helps us get over that, and anybody who's on this chat who wants to help, there's two things that Philly needs to get better at than we currently are, which is there's three topics that you don't really need to know anything about that people feel very free to offer their opinion, and I seem to work in all three: religion, politics, and poverty. Like, if you started talking like out of your, about physics and you didn't know what you were talking about, people would call you out. But poverty feels very democratic. Well, I have this opinion that my granddaddy told me about. There's actually metrics and measurements and if you look at A Better Chicago, they have a dashboard, and I need help with this. Anybody wants to help me? You can't figure out where you want to go until you establish the baseline of where we currently are. The poverty tracker at Robinhood in New York, the partnership between Columbia and Robinhood, That's the dashboard. But the second thing is it's deeply personal. Looking and taking an honest inventory as to how you are personally invested with your time, talent, and treasure, and your neighbor being able to claim a piece of the American dream. You can look at your usage now of how much you're on your iPad. How much time are you allocating to the quest that your neighbors are on to overcome their obstacles?
Unfortunately, we are at time. This is the conversation I wanted to have. I know it's not perhaps the usual one, and thank you for doing it in this strange, sterile, virtual environment. Those of you who will know, Introduce is typically a lively annual in-person conference. We'll be back there someday. But stick around. Thanks, guys, so much for this conversation. Everyone gets a short break here, then we're back at 11 a.m. sessions. Make sure to check out the networking and expo functions in addition to the other sessions taking place right now. Thanks to Elizabeth Delali, Governor Jack Markell, and Bill Golder. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you all.
Thank you.